Hey, this is John with FixYourDirtBike.com. This is a step-by-step video to show you how to inspect and replace the front wheel bearings on your 1997 through 2001 Honda CR250. To test your bearings, put your bike on a stand with the front wheel off the ground. Remove the front brake caliper and hang it out of the way to eliminate noise in case you have a dragging brake. To start, double check that your axle nut and pinch bolts are torqued correctly. Your axle nut should be torqued to 65 pound-feet, and the pinch bolts should be torqued to 14 pound-feet. Give your wheel a strong spin, then watch and listen. If you don't hear anything and your wheel spins free, your bearings are fine, and you can go watch this clutch maintenance video right here. If you hear any ticking, clicking, grinding, or if your wheel stops abruptly, your bearings need to be replaced before your next ride. Side note, the main cause of bearing failure is compromised seals, so make sure to inspect your seals before every ride. The tools you will need are a long drift, in this case I used a tire iron, a big hammer, a regular hammer, a socket that matches the inside bearing race diameter, a socket that matches the outside bearing race diameter, a propane torch, 2x4s, rubber gloves, work gloves, and eye protection. The parts you will need are a set of new bearings and seals and a bucket of grease. I will be installing a new set of factory links bearings and seals. These bearings come pre-greased and double shielded, and the seals are reinforced with an internal tension spring. I highly recommend the factory links bearing and seal set. They go for $20 on Amazon, and you can buy yours through the link below. The grease I will be using is general purpose automotive grease from the 1980s, and you can get yours from your grandpa's garage. Begin by removing the old bearing seals. Insert your drift from the right side of the hub up to, but not touching, the left bearing. Work your drift up and down to push the distance collar away from the inner bearing race. Place your wheel on some 2x4s. Make sure the rim and tire are the only part of the wheel touching the wood. You will be hammering your bearings out, so make sure you are on a solid surface. Heat the hub with your propane torch. This will let your hub expand and take pressure off the bearings. Work your torch around the hub, keeping the heat even as you go. Heat the hub for around 1 minute, or until you start to see a little smoke. Flip your wheel over, place a socket over the inner race bearing, and hammer the opposite bearing out. Reheat your hub as needed. Your bearings may come out in one piece, or they might shatter like mine did. If the other bearing is still intact, repeat the heat and beat process. Inspect each part of the hub assembly for wear, pits, or burrs. If you find any rough areas, file them down to smooth. Do not remove material from the ends of the distance collars. They need to stay an exact length. If the ends are damaged, replace the collar. After you have removed any damage, sand every hub component with 220 grit sandpaper to ensure every contact surface is as clean as possible. This is a perfect example of impatience. At some point, someone thought the collar guide was the outer bearing race and tried to pound it out. I know that's what happened because I've done it. If you find this inside your hub, file what you can, and make sure the bearing and seal bore are as smooth as possible. Take your new bearings and make sure that they do not fit. These bearings are a driven fit, so if they slip into the hub on their own, the hub is worn and needs to be replaced. In this case, the left side bore is a loose fit at first, but tightens up farther in. This will still work, but this is probably the last bearing change for this hub. To see how all the parts of the hub work together, check out my video on how your front wheel hub works. If you go with a single shield bearings, you will need to grease them before install, and the shielded side will face out. Install the bearing on the opposite side of the distance collar guide first. Place your wheel on a block of wood so only the hub is supported. Position your bearing flush against the hub. Use a socket that is big enough to match the outer bearing race, but will still fit into the bore, and start tapping the bearing into place. Once the bearing starts to seat, make sure it is square to the bore. Adjust the bearing with light hammer taps as needed. Drive the bearing until it is seated into the bore. Flip your wheel and insert the distance collar. Repeat the driving process until the top of the bearing is flush with the bore. Insert the axle into the opposite side of the hub to align the collar and the bearings. As you can see, the axle is too long for a socket, so build up a base with wood to support the hub and let the axle sit lower. Make sure the axle is still tight in the collar and bearings. Drive the bearing into the bore, then remove the axle. Apply fresh grease to the seal bore. If your seals contain a retaining spring, make sure it is facing in. Finally, drive your new seals flush into the hub. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and as always, make sure to like and subscribe.